When are you gonna stream like this? Never, never. In the metaverse, brah. Okay, we'll be here in the metaverse. Okay. Just imagine this, but you guys are all fucking like digital or some shit. Okay. Oh yeah, what's going on here? I told you, I'm already. This was the plan the whole time. The play was to just be a fucking block integrated into the metaverse. Okay, that was the whole point. We're just slowly headed in that direction.
Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to go through a mix of some practical tips for beginners and a few hidden stats and bonuses in Age of Empires 4. Overall, the descriptions in the game are pretty transparent about how civilizations, units, and buildings work, but it still takes some time to figure everything out.
It
The goal
does.
here is to speed up that learning process, while also helping to avoid some easy mistakes. I'll start with some general tips that apply to all civilizations, and then we'll look into some civilization-specific ones after. With that, let's check them out. First of all, if you've spent any amount of time playing the game, you'll know it's sometimes tricky to set your gather point on sheep. Villagers
is.
all huddle together, and it can be hard to know if you've properly clicked on the sheep or just a random
The cursor
spot on the ground.
changes.
If you miss, a newly created villager will just end up standing around until you notice them, which in Dark Age is idle time you really don't want to have. The good news is there's a pretty simple trick. When you place a gather point on a resource like sheep, gold, or tree, etc., you get a blue flag and line coming from your town center. On the other hand, if you
Oh, I'd
don't
never
select a
noticed
resource,
that color
only the
change.
yellow flag and line are drawn.
Or what that
That
meant.
means when you're trying to click on a sheep, keep an eye out for the color blue. And if you see a blue flag, you know you did it right. The next tip, also related to the town center, is that your first one can garrison 20 villagers, whereas additional ones you construct can only hold 10, despite appearing to be the same size building. Without outposts, that means there's a real chance you'll end up with more villagers around a second TC than you can protect during a raid. On the other side of things, that means that when you're raiding, second town centers can be better targets than your opponent's starting one, as they'll end up firing fewer arrows in many cases, and you may be lucky enough to catch a group of villagers locked outside. One more
I always
town
get
center
scared
tip
of the
is that, like
TC's
all defensive
arrows.
buildings, they have a massive bonus against ships. You might think you could handle taking a bit of fire while raiding a shoreline, but depending on which building we're talking about, ships could be taking 2, 3, or even up to 4 times as much damage as a land unit would, so you have to be careful with that. The exception is Imperial Age warships, which can outrange defenses and have a large bonus against buildings. Keep in mind though that warships can take up to 6 population each.
You know what I
and
noticed on 1v1s? There's been no naval maps. I actually like that. Naval maps are kind of fucking annoying. But they're fun. They kind of change it up, but I don't know, maybe they disabled the naval maps in standard or some shit, but I don't mind. I prefer no naval.
Even smaller ships take up at least 2
And
pop
before
space,
all I
so
get
you
is
wanna
naval
factor that
today.
into your villager count. Siege units and elephants also require 3 population space, so you may find you're housed quite a bit when using those particular units. And speaking of naval units, you may have already noticed, but in Age of Empires 4, docks auto-heal nearby ships, even during combat, giving defenders a subtle advantage. For another defensive tip, walling up can be a good way to prevent raids, but how you build them can impact how much you pay. Palisade walls have a set cost for initially placing them of 15 wood, but give a discount on longer segments. The practical application of this is when you're placing walls, try to use long segments if possible, and the fewest number of new segments and direction changes that you can. Another defensive tip is that outposts only fire with villagers garrisoned inside of them, unless you upgrade them by paying for one of the weapon add-ons. Unfortunately, you can only have one of those weapons equipped at a time. It was also
I never
surprising
upgrade
to
the
learn first time
outposts.
that non-siege units can't attack stone walls, so you'll need to build a siege workshop or use rams or siege towers to get past them. That brings up another mechanic to know, which is that to build rams and siege towers, you first need to research siege engineering at the blacksmith, after which you can build them with infantry or archers. The Abbasids are an exception though, and one of their civ bonuses is that they can skip that tech.
A what?
Speaking of siege though, it's good to know that Springolds do 60 damage.
So I was gonna play a Bassid today. I didn't know that. They just have Siege unlocked, which means you can just make a bunch of men-at-arms and then instantly make a battering ram.
Which is pretty high already, but then another plus 20 more against siege. They also have slightly longer range than a mangonel and cost half as much wood, making them a pretty good counter. A good tip for mangonels as well is that unlike Age of Empires 2, their blast area doesn't damage your own units, so feel free to fire indiscriminately into a large group. Another beginner tip is to know the distinction between crossbows and archers. Crossbows have bonus damage against heavy or armored units, like knights, men-at-arms, palace guards, and elephants. Archers, on the other hand, do their bonus damage against spearmen. Also, in case you're wondering, there is nothing different about the knight and lancer. Aside from how they look and their name, they're statistically identical in every way.
Huh.
And one last generic tip is that traders get 20% more gold for a route of the same length when trading with a neutral market rather than an ally one. This is to offset the fact that real players would be able to put markets in more optimal locations. And as in Age of Empires 2, the longer the route, the better your gold income is going to be over time. But now let's
I
move
already
on and
thought
talk
that.
about civilization-specific tips, which are good to know whether playing as a civ or against them. We'll start with the Mongols, who have quite a few unique mechanics and correspondingly a lot of little things to be aware of. The first is that while both Mongols and Rus have access to cavalry archers, the Mongols version is unique for being able to fire while it's moving.
Yep.
This is especially frustrating for enemy cavalry, which can find it hard to force an engagement. Their Khan also has various special abilities to help nearby units, but one thing to remember is those abilities also affect him. For example, you can use his speed boost to help your scouting from the first moment of the game, and while it only lasts a few seconds and speeds him up by a third,
I could go
it's a
back to
convenient
playing
way to escape
Mongols,
danger,
actually.
or just find your sheep
I
a
wouldn't
little faster.
mind.
Also, if you get a bit careless and too close to an enemy town center and lose your Khan, don't worry about it. He respawns 2 minutes later, no worse for wear.
Of course.
Another tip with Mongols is that they're able to pack and move their buildings, which theoretically can save quite a bit of wood replacing lumber camps. As the wood line moves back, you can just pack up your gur, move it a little closer, and rebuild it. One word of caution though is the rebuild time is surprisingly long. So
Yeah, the
if you're
Mongol
dropping
buildings
very
are
far
meh.
from your town center, you may want to have 2 gur in the area and just move them one at a time.
That's the
If you
worst thing
don't
about
do
the
that, then
Mongols.
your villagers may not have a camp and walk halfway across the map to drop off their wood as you're unpacking. While on the topic of Mongol buildings, I think it's also worth talking about their pastures, which produce sheep to make up for the Mongols' lack of farming. Something to keep in mind is that while pastures kind of look like resource drop-off buildings, they aren't, which means you need a gur or town center nearby to drop off the food that your villagers are collecting. You also may not have realized, but you can set a rally point for the new sheep, letting you keep your villagers safe and efficient beside your town center, and the sheep will
What the
just deliver
fuck? I didn't know
themselves.
you could do
And
that.
finally, my last tip for Mongols is when you have an ovu on a stone pile, you might be tempted to place military buildings around it for the double production. But you can also place other buildings like the gur in range to unlock improved versions of basic techs. For example, wheelbarrow adds +7 to your villager's carry capacity if paid for with stone at a gur, as opposed to +5 if you research it normally. Mongols are better known for their aggression than economy, but if you have a lot of stone and you're not sure what to do with it, getting extra powerful techs can be a good option. Moving on though, now let's talk about the English. Their signature unit is the longbow, a better
Fuck
version
the
of
English.
archer.
I'm over
Turns
them.
out, though, that comes at a cost, and longbows
They're
are
fun to
actually
play,
quite a
but
bit more
whatever.
expensive than the generic archer line. Luckily, English have great farming, so that's rarely an issue. In exchange for their higher cost, longbows have more attack and range than generic archers, along with 2 special abilities. After researching relevant texts, they can use camps to heal, even in the middle of battle, as long as they stand near the campfire, and they can also deploy palings to stop cavalry charges. Also, just in case you were wondering, the campfire symbol that you may notice as English above your defensive buildings is telling you there's an enemy nearby, and your units in the immediate area have a temporary attack rate boost.
What
In
the
the early
fuck?
game,
I
it
didn't
can
know
also
that.
be a nice visual indication that you've been scouted by your enemy. Next up, my one tip for the French is that aside from their access to good cavalry, keep in mind their crossbow line is also extremely potent. Not only does the arbalétrier have the ability to deploy a pavise, but with a unique technology they even get +5 melee armor. This is also on top of a bit of extra melee armor that they have that the usual crossbow line doesn't, which all adds up, so be a little extra careful around that unit. For the Holy Roman Empire, a good beginner tip is not to forget about making prelates in the Dark Age. They can buff up to 10
I don't
villagers
like that
at a
about the
time,
Holy
giving
Roman
them a
Empires.
40%
I don't want to
faster
make a
work rate.
priest.
Also, with the Aachen
Or a
Chapel
monk.
landmark and a prelate garrisoned inside, they can even buff any number of villagers within a short range. Something else to be mindful of is their emergency repair ability on buildings.
Oh
in the
yeah,
starting town
fuck that
center's
ability.
influence. The ability lets any building restore up to 3,000 HP over 20 seconds, though there's a global 45-second cooldown between uses. Moving on to the Abbasids, their secret weapon is their camels. When picking an army
Oh.
composition, keep in mind their camel archers have a massive bonus against spearmen, and camel riders
Oh, the
have bonus
Abbasids
damage
are the
against
camel
cavalry, while
dudes.
both also reduce the damage
Shit.
of nearby
I haven't
cavalry
bursted
by
a good
20%.
Abbasid.
Even having just one camel in an army will give you that effect. Also, I think it pays to be mindful of their Golden Age system, and reaching higher tiers gives global production bonuses to your villagers and research. To get to higher tiers, you need to have more buildings in your House of Wisdom's influence. And a good tip is if you have some buildings outside of that influence, you can use houses to connect them. Houses also add to your structure count, though farms don't, and you'll want to
I
make
guess
sure every
Abbasid
building
plays
possible is being
interesting.
counted, as the rewards are quite strong. The next tip goes for both the Abbasids and Delhi, which is to remember their Forge Bush bonus. Not only do they collect from them 25% faster, making them a faster food source.
Oh, so they're way better
but
on
if you have a mill
on.
beside them,
Okay.
it doubles their food count from 250 to 500. Now, Delhi are a very unusual.
I'm actually gonna play
civilization, as
Mongols
their
again
research is
today.
free, but works at
I
a
wanna
fifth
play
usual
aggressive.
rate if you have no scholars garrisoned. That means you'll want to keep lots of research queued at every building as much as possible, and also garrison scholars if you can afford them. I found that every extra scholar you make in garrison speeds up all research by about 20%, though in-game it claims to be much less than that. To give you a sense of it, you end up needing 9 scholars garrisoned between your various mosques before you reach the generic research rate. Delhi are also unusual on water maps, as their fishing boats can fire arrows. They're
Oh.
not particularly strong and won't hold up to a significant group of proper military ships, but it does offer at least a little protection and could catch someone off guard. As for the Rus, their navy is also pretty unique and maybe a little counterintuitive. Their ships can actually convert between different types for a small cost. In addition to that, unlike every other civ, they only have one type of warship, plus the demolition ship, and instead of unlocking additional types of ships as they age up, they just get a unique technology to improve their HP. Just keep in mind, if you aren't keeping up with your techs, you'll find you're eventually outmatched on water against any other civ. Another beginner tip is that their Streltsy unique unit gain attack if they don't move. Overmanaging and microing units is a lot of fun, but in this
I
case
do like
can
the
also be
Rus
detrimental.
muskets though, or
The
the
Rus
I
also
do
have
I
a
do want to
very
play
strange
Rus
start if you aren't
eventually.
used to it, and they can gain gold by killing animals on the map or generate it passively with their hunting cabins placed near trees. Their hunting cabins can also create scouts, which can be a good way to speed up how quickly you can hunt across the map. Scouts aren't particularly good at raiding though, so don't expect too much in a fight. Somewhat related, if you're playing against the Rus and okay with fighting dirty, you can actually pre-hunt animals on the map that you come across. Unless you're Rus, you won't be getting gold from them, but you'll be preventing the Rus player from getting them, which, based on how their bonuses work, sabotages both their short and long-term gold income.
Oh.
Obviously, there's a trade-off between doing that and potentially losing out on sheep though. A final tip for the Rus is that their wooden fortresses not only give your villagers a safe place to garrison with more space than outposts normally have, but they also increase the amount of wood that's being dropped off at lumber camps nearby. It's not a bad idea to add them to any exposed woodlines, as after harvesting just 6 trees, they've ended up paying for themselves. And finally, we'll finish up with the Chinese. You may already know, but it's a little confusing, so I'll summarize their dynasty system. To enter a new dynasty, you need 2 landmarks from a particular age. Of course, you'll have 1 landmark already after each time you advance, so you just build the second option to unlock that age's dynasty. The Song Dynasty in Feudal Age, for example, is a
Wait, you
pretty
need
good one,
2
which you get
fucking
from building the
landmarks?
Imperial Academy and Barbican of the Sun. If you're in the Song Dynasty, you get faster
Oh, it's
production of
400,
villagers,
200.
access to the village, which is a cheap
It's not
way to
super
get
expensive.
a lot of housing quickly, and also unlock a unique crossbow unit. Keep in mind, the second landmark for a dynasty has no reduction in cost, so it's almost as if you're paying to age up
Oh,
twice.
they have cool
The
gunner
later
units
landmarks can
too.
get pretty expensive, and in some cases that may not seem worth it to you. There's also no way to go back to a previous dynasty, though you can hold on to access to any unique units you've unlocked by building the Spirit Way landmark. And one final tip is that Fire Lancers have massive torch damage, so they're especially good at bringing down buildings. You can unlock them once you're in Castle Age by building the second Castle Age landmark, and it's a cool unit that even has some area of effect when it charges. That's all of the Age of Empires 4 tips that I can think of at the moment. If I come up with more, I may do
Okay.
a second list. But either way, I hope this was helpful to any of you just picking up or trying the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
That was pretty interesting. I mean, he broke down a lot of different factions and stuff. There were like a couple of general tips. The others were more specific to the faction you're playing, so. Shit, man.